When it comes to 20th century history, there are few names as well known as that of Adolf Hitler, Germany's leader moving up to and during World War II. However, unlike so many of history's heroes, Adolf Hitler has gone down in the record books for all the wrong reasons. The atrocities committed in his name resulted in the deaths of millions of innocent people, and images of people struggling for survival in the concentration camps are related with the reign of terror that Hitler dictated. People today still struggle with how Hitler was able to rise to this power and gain in this situation. With his father only being a civil servant, it must have been the anger that had driven him forward to accomplish what he had set out to do. He had become overwhelmed with the power, and so it had led him to spiral out of control. He believes that he was more than a person and rather a ruler among the people. This had led him to make self-confident mistakes because he believed he was something more and wanted no advice from his supporters and those around him, getting rid of the people that had told him. This leads us to ask the question, why was his rise his greatest fall?
This story begins at the end of World War I with a successful Allied advance in 1918. Germany realized the war was unwinnable and signed an armistice ending the fighting. As its imperial government collapsed, civil unrest and worker strikes spread across the nation. Fearing a communist revolution, major parties joined to suppress the uprisings, establishing the Parliamentary Weimar Republic. In addition to losing over a tenth of its territory and dismantling its army, Germany had to accept full responsibility for the war and pay reparations, debilitating its already weakened economy. All this was seen as a humiliation by many nationalists and veterans. They wrongly believed the war could have been won if the army hadn't been betrayed by its politicians and protesters. For Hitler, these views became obsession, and his bigotry and paranoid delusions led him to pin the blame on Jews. His words found resonance in a society with many anti-Semitic people. By this time, hundreds of thousands of Jews has integrated into German society, but many Germans continue to perceive them as outsiders. It cannot be stressed enough that these conspiracy theories were born out of fear, anger, and bigotry, not fact. Nonetheless, Hitler found success with them when he joined a small nationalist political party. With his manipulative public speaking, it turned into his leadership and drew increasingly larger crowds. Combining anti-Semitism with populist resentment, the Nazis denounced both communism and capitalism as international Jewish conspiracies to destroy Germany. The Nazi Party was not initially popular. After they made an unsuccessful attempt at overthrowing the government, the party was banned and Hitler jailed for treason. Upon his release a year later, he began to rebuild the Nazi Party. In 1929, the Great Depression had hit the world. It led to American banks withdrawing their loans from Germany, and the already struggling German economy collapsed overnight. Hitler capitalized on people's anger, offering them convenient scapegoats and promises to restore Germany to its former greatness. Mainstream parties proved unable to handle the crisis, while left-wing opposition was too fragmented by internal unrest. Because of this, some of the frustrated public flocked to the Nazi Party, increasing their parliamentary votes from under 3% to over 18% in just 2 years. In 1932, Hitler ran for president, but lost to decorated war hero General von Hindenburg. With 36% of the vote, Hitler had demonstrated the extent of his support. The following year, advisors and business leaders convinced Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as chancellor, hoping to channel his popularity for their own goals. Though the chancellor was only the administrative head of parliament, Hitler steadily expanded the power of his position, while his supporters formed paramilitary and fought protesters in the streets. Hitler raised fears of communist uprising and urged that only he could restore law and order. Then, in 1933, a young worker was convicted of setting fire to the Parliament building. Hitler used the event to convince the government to grant him emergency powers. Within a matter of months, freedom of the press was abolished, other parties were disbanded, and anti-Jewish laws were passed. With these rules set in place, Hitler had set himself as dictator of Germany. Many of Hitler's early radical supporters were arrested and executed along with potential rivals. When President Hindenburg died in August 1934, it was clear there would be no new election.
Hitler's rise ultimately became his fall. His ever-growing power in Germany seemed to have sealed the fate of the Germans. The trait that had ended his reign was his overconfidence. After conquering a large portion of Europe, it was still not enough for him. He kept on going. He was overconfident in what his Nazi army could accomplish, and became overambitious with his goals. An example of his overconfidence in his actions were over the British blockade on the German army. When this had happened, he had simply turned around and started fighting the Soviet Union. Hitler believed that he was unstoppable, leading him to believe that he could take on multiple countries at once. In addition to this, he did not clothe or train his soldiers adequately. Hitler was still so overconfident that he ordered his troops to never withdraw, and any retreating troops would be shot on sight. Another mistake that he had made were the alliances that he chose. Choosing Japan as one of the Axis powers may have not been one of the best choices because one of their actions out of greed. While Hitler was conquering Europe, countries left and right, Japan had sat back and watched. Japan then thought it was a great idea to attack a currently neutral country, in hopes that it would ruin the morale by destroying the United States naval fleet. This plan proved to be detrimental in Japan's success in the war because their action had been the last straw for the United States, who had been disgusted with the Axis powers for a while. The United States quickly joined to protect its allies and against the slowly weakening German army. Hitler and his army had everything they needed to win the war, but because of his actions, he failed to do so. For example, the first fighter jet made, the Me-262, was supposed to be used as a defensive fighter jet to protect different areas. This was because this jet was almost untouchable and could still take down any other fighter planes. Hitler decided to use this jet as an offensive bomber jet, which was almost the complete opposite of what it was originally meant for. Because of this mistake, the Germans would lose a lot of these jets because they were put into poor situations that they were not built for. On top of this, these were some of the most expensive jets to make. This just goes on to show that Hitler only cared about what he thought and didn't take any others into consideration, even if it costed him or the lives of others. Hitler had lost the war because of his arrogance. He believed that he was better than others. This would lead him to not listening to his advisors and simply turning them away. Hitler did not have much knowledge in the military field, which also had led him to make incorrect decisions that he believed were correct. Hitler could have won the war, but because of too many of these poor decisions, he had led himself into his own defeats.